Welcome to the Financing Simplified podcast with Anthony Venuto. If you're looking for answers to your financial questions, let Anthony and his network of friends and associates answer regular questions that regular people have about their money. Thanks for tuning in. It's time to start simplifying your finances.
Welcome back to the Financing Simplified podcast, where today I am joined by a very special guest out in one of our provinces here in Canada, in Calgary. Wanted to bring him on, have a conversation with, our viewers and Adam as well. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment, but obviously talking about Calgary, big conversation point. A lot of clients that we've been working with now have, maybe made the shift over, the little bit of an interprovincial migration as home prices in Ontario continue to stay at very elevated prices. But I'm going to kick the mic over to Adam here and let him introduce himself. Adam, once again, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Really appreciate it, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about what you do. Take it away.
Anthony, thank you so much for allowing me on the podcast, man. My name's Adam Fife. I'm a YouTuber and a realtor here in Calgary, Alberta. Been in the industry since 2017, so some of the most depressed years that Calgary's ever seen, and kind of grinding through those slow markets. And over the last few years, it's absolutely popped off. It's been a hell of a journey, and I know that you and I have been connected over the last couple of years here, kind of having some various conversations about finances and what's going on in the investment market. And man, how many investors have come from Ontario to capitalize on the Calgary real estate market? I've seen some really good numbers. Now, the investors have slowed down a little bit for all of those great incomes and potentials that they've seen, but Calgary is still rocking and rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know Calgary has been on the radar. It's one of those things here in Ontario. I know there's been a lot of promotion from Alberta to, talk about Calgary, talk about Alberta, Edmonton, right across the board, obviously, right? But like you mentioned, your YouTube channel, it's growing. That's how we got to connect. Obviously, as a YouTuber, you have definitely provided some really good insights, and I love what you're doing with the channel. It's always interesting, I guess we geek out on this stuff because we're in real estate and mortgages, and we like to know what's trending, what's happening, and providing that data to the broader audience, I guess. And I wanted to really get your thoughts. And the reason we want to bring you on the podcast is because you're the expert, right? You're the guy out there. I know you know the data points. First and foremost, I think, why do you think, in your opinion, your capacity, why Calgary? Why is Calgary one of those markets that's up and coming? It's really getting a lot of attention.
I mean, Calgary, I truthfully believed in Calgary even during the depressed years. I mean, there's a lot of activities and stuff to do. I think that people really rely on that lifestyle, right? You've got the flatland prairies where you can have a lot of fishing and hunting and all that jazz, but then we also got the mountains right at our doorsteps. We've got a lot of beautiful rivers and lakes, just like Ontario, but there's just this trifecta of a lot of different activities that you could do. So, I mean, if you're an indoor person, an outdoor person, Ontario also offers a lot of these great things, but Alberta with the mountains, I believe that a lot of people really feel driven to come out here and just explore kind of the unknown, if you would. So I would say that Calgary is a very, very good spot for people to explore if they're adventurous, as well as when you start to break down some of the tax implications and some of the cost of investment, like no land transfer tax for investors and just stuff like that. There's a lot of other bonuses that go with the lifestyle that also relate into like a business avenue.
You know what? You hit it over the head. I know you're trying to plug in Ontario. Ontario has its own beauty as well, but we've been out there to Calgary. We met up in person. Obviously, we have some properties out there. One of them you're handling for us as well. So it is truly beautiful. If you think about it from center, and as I said, I might be getting this wrong, but from center Calgary to Banff, I think it was an hour and 40 minutes, not even. Give or take. And I mean, from here, you're looking at maybe getting to like Blue Mountain or Wasaga Beach, maybe a little bit further. Beautiful, as I said. Once you're out there, it's actually surreal. So if you're out there and you're wondering, you want to travel Canada, I am telling you, you need to go to Calgary. It is truly fantastic. Now, you brought up some really good points. The tax implications are out of this world. Like, I mean, for Ontario, people that live in Ontario, we understand HST, but it's completely different out in Calgary. What is it, 8%? It's just the 8%. 5%. There you go. So I even got that wrong. 5%, guys. And you mentioned the closing costs. I think that was one of the biggest drivers on why we chose to sort of work and invest in Calgary, not to mention the price points, right? So what you can actually get in Calgary for the price, you cannot go wrong, right? And the fact that there's no land transfer tax, for those of you in Ontario know, it's quite expensive here.
It's a huge savings, man. I mean, it's actually mind-blowing. I didn't really realize how much of a savings that was until about 2021, where people came over and started asking questions right after the pandemic, started looking at some pre-construction, knowing that Calgary was on its up and up right at the beginning of this whole upturn. And they were sharing with me all of the previous things that they dealt with in Ontario and British Columbia of how they had to close and pay an additional tax. That plus how much Alberta favors the landlord over the tenant. Now, I don't want to get into specifics, but I can tell you right now, if you actually look at the tenancy acts and you look at the stories and lawsuits between the two provinces, it's vastly different. So I think a lot of people, for the lower price point, the tax savings, as well as having more leverage of their assets, our Calgary and Alberta has just absolutely popped off when people started realizing that.
I'm telling you, as an investor, landlord, the tenancy agreements, the way that things work out in Alberta are much more favorable to landlords. Now, not to say that landlords, should be taking advantage of these situations, because I want to be very clear, right? But I mean, it is more favorable in the sense that if someone doesn't pay or there's legal proceedings, how fast these things can be rectified is very, very important. And I think that's a major conversation or sore spot for a lot of investors here in Ontario, because as rents get astronomically higher, we have these rolling issues with tenants not wanting to pay. We have rent control. Landlords, obviously higher interest rates right now. A lot of investors took on variable rate mortgages. We know this. They're looking to make up their shortfalls. And, I know that there's no real cap out there. And that's one thing I noticed. I'm going to say this straight out, was when we arrived in Calgary, as soon as they sort of, I guess, maybe heard our accent or lack of an accent, whatever the case, whatever you want to call it, as soon as we said we were from Ontario, it was almost like they were like a little bit pushed back, I think, because they feel like we're intruding on their space. Is that a consensus?
Yes, I've been dealing with a lot of locals over the last little while, especially I feel bad for a lot of people, truthfully, who, they've been in the rental market for ages. They never really cared to get out of the rental market. And then all of a sudden within 2 years, it's like, I can't even find a rental in the community that I grew up in. So there's a lot of shade being thrown at people from Ontario. But I also say, not a lot of people know this actually, but I was born and raised in Brantford, Ontario. So I actually came to Alberta in 2015 from Brantford. So when you actually start to dive into it, there was a lot of people that came from Ontario kind of late 2000s for the oil and gas boom. So it's unfortunate to say for sure, but Ontario, there's a lot of people coming from Ontario. So
I know firsthand, as I said, I was there for a short period of time, Adam, and a lot of people that I talked to, whether it be hopping into a cab or talking to wait staff, a lot of people that I spoke to, they weren't actually native from Alberta. They've actually interprovincially they've migrated to Alberta. And, I'm one of those guys that I'm very inquisitive. I asked, what was the reason? What made you make the move out here, right? Because God knows those winters are pretty cold, right? You guys just came through a pretty cold spout over there, according to what we hear over here. I don't know if that's truth or myth. That's good.
I mean, it happens every year. We've always get some sort of cold snap. It always drops down to -35 minimum, but it usually doesn't last very long. If you get up to places like Edmonton or even Saskatoon, it will last a proper, 2 weeks, where it's for 2 weeks, everything's frozen, yada, yada, yada. The nice thing about Calgary is the way that we're positioned, and when you actually look at the Vancouver coastline, it's actually quite interesting because we get what's called a Chinook. So we get that warm air kind of rising up. It goes into the atmosphere over the mountains and it drops down. So Calgary will go from -40 to 15 within a day, and then it'll get right up to like 2 degrees. So, I mean, we get some wild Chinooks, which is super cool. So we do have a lot of cold snaps, but we also get a lot of warmth that makes up for that. And I think that's what people really bank on when they come here.
Well, speaking of warmth, let's see how we can warm people's pockets, right? Right. A lot of clients are questioning, and we're having these conversations day to day. As I said, when investors are thinking about the next leg, especially from our position here in Ontario, about, do I buy a house in Ontario that's going to cost me potentially double the price that I can get a property for, or 2 properties in Calgary? And obviously, I want you to dive into some of those numbers. What do you see happening right now? I'm going to give you full reins on this. I know you know all the dats, all the quants. Let us know what you think. What are average prices looking like? Homes on the market, rent. Go through some of those points for our viewers. Let them know what's going on.
So just for the viewers out there, I do talk about these things every single month. I have to plug in at some point. Every month I do talk about the numbers. I'll dive into the total residential, the detached, the semi-detached, the condos, and the townhouses, because every investor, every homeowner or buyer wants to know what specifically is going on in their market. So when I talk about these things today on our channel, or on your channel, sorry, I'm going to just bring up kind of the benchmark averages for the entire city. Now, the interesting thing about Calgary is we've got 8 different quadrants in the city. So we've got our western quadrant, which is the most sought after, which is the most expensive. But then you've got the eastern quadrant of Calgary, and they've got a difference of like $400,000, right? And I think you could have the similarities in the GTA. So when we're talking about kind of the average price points in Calgary currently, we have what's called our total residential. Now, our total residential is just an amalgamation of all 4 property types put into one, and that's $570,000 currently, up about $63,000 from this time last year. Now, when you start to talk about the detached, we've got $697, you got your semis at $627, your townhouse at $425, and our apartments are still quite low, they're $321. So basic numbers for your viewers right there.
So that is actually really good in comparison to the average home in some of the GTA markets. I don't think you can get into a condo for less than a decent condo for like less than 550, 500. Like, I mean, and that's really low if you can find at that price. So that obviously shows, at least to me, why, or validates to me the reason why we sort of went out to Calgary. So I'll share with our viewers a little bit of the situation that we sort of, experienced back in 2021. We bought from a builder called Minto. I'm assuming that you're seeing a lot more builders from Ontario across Canada sort of venture into Alberta. So we were into buying from them. We ended up getting some really good prices on some of those, I guess you call them the townhouses, stacked town. They have maintenance fees, a little different. Really happy with the quality, really happy. You walk through them, you've seen them, and for the price point that you're getting at, I think, and as I said, we'll share with our viewers what we ended up doing. I think we got one they were just in the low 4s, like very low 4s. One was a 3 bedroom, 3 bath, 2-car garage, 420 something, and 430, I think it was. And then one was the 2 bedroom, 1.5 was like 412. And I mean, I know some of the people that we've talked to, we bought with a whole bunch of buddies at different stages. Some of them paid less than $400,000 for some of those units. And why am I saying this? And what's the reason behind it? Because the rent itself, we have one unit rented right now for around $2,500 a month. Now, what are the rents looking like in some of these particular units if people wanted to know? Like, fill us in. Let us know, as I said, the range. You don't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be precise.
Yeah, that's fair. So kind of like the benchmark prices for Calgary, we do have a spread for rents. Now, rents are very interesting because it's very hard to try to dictate what rents are, because a lot of the data points are only from asking rents. So the great thing about real estate is you look at a lot of the sold data, what people are actually willing to pay for a property. So they could ask $1 million, but they might sell it for 8, right? So obviously that home was worth 8. Where rents are a little differently because they're only really going off asking prices and they don't know what the final number is. So a couple of the data points that I really enjoy following are rentfaster.ca, rentals.ca, and live.rent, liv.rent. Live.rent honestly is one of my favorites. I think that they have really good graphs. So when you start to talk about the rents and you go onto their website, you'll notice that in the city center, on average, a 2-bedroom is selling for about renting for $22.62. Where if you're going into Northwest, it drops down to about $18.50, Northeast $19.9, Southwest $21, and then Southeast about $21 as well. So everything's going to differ, and that I only talk about 2-bedroom condos. That's not including townhouses. So everything very much differs. And when I was doing the research on kind of the Minto area, we're looking at an average around 23 to 24 for a townhouse, right? And I want to touch on this because I think it's so vital that a lot of people that I've found and I deal with have bought the properties in 2021, lower prices, but look at the interest rate difference. There are a large amount of people that, yes, they have increased in value, but instead of putting it on the rental market, they almost have to sell it because their interest rate is upwards of 6%. So now their mortgage is very close to outweighing what they're going to get with rents when you start including taxes and potential condo fees. So yes, Calgary rents have increased, and they've increased dramatically compared to the last 2 years. And yes, home prices have increased, but the interest rates are like just destroying a lot of investors. Maybe not destroying is probably a really bad term to say, but they're definitely cutting into the margins at a significant rate.
Well, you bring up a really good point about the rents and those, how close to, if not shortfalling, a lot of landlords potentially are. And I can tell you from what we see, like obviously it's timing, right? If you bought some of those units well before 2021, your mortgage is going to be small. Yeah, you're just going to eat into your margins, of course. But for a lot of investors in most markets, especially during the height of the Me Too, I call it the, I'm going to get a rental property because so-and-so has a rental property, and they see, all the benefits or perks at the time when interest rates were lower. My point is, with the most landlords and investors here, some of them are really shortfalling, right? And imagine shortfalling on a larger mortgage. I mean, you're buying a property for, let's say, 400, you're putting 20 points down, you're carrying a smaller mortgage, but imagine buying a property at 800, 900, or 700 and having to carry that mortgage. The shortfall gaps are a lot larger. And what do you see happening in Calgary and in Alberta itself when it comes to investors? Is it a trend that a lot of the investors are shortfalling, or are they just that's not something that is kosher down there, right? Because I hear in Ontario, as I said, it is. Most people that own condos, they're shortfalling, they were comfortable. Now all of a sudden they're shortfalling more.
Well, that's a very interesting topic because over the last, I started recording a monthly investment video specifically for investors, specifically talking about rents versus the purchasing of an investment. Now, it's very blanketed. So, if you end up watching that, take it with a massive grain of salt because every individual's mortgage is going to be very different. So I try very hard to express that on that video. But a lot of what I've seen right now is a lot of the investors are willing to take that shortfall of $200 to $300 a month or $400 a month because, especially in the townhouse market, if what I believe is true, and in 2024, the townhouse market's going to grow by another 8 to 12%, maybe you have a shortfall of, let's say $3,000 over 2024, but the home price is increased by $8,000, right? That could be worth your investment if you're willing to take on that risk. So when I deal with the average investor right now, I get a lot of people reaching out to me. I showcase that to them and say, what is your strategy? Are you looking for appreciation, or are you looking for a turnkey property where you know that it's going to take care of itself for the long haul? And it's very hard to find those turnkey properties right now until those mortgage rates drop, because a lot of people are coming to me with that 20% down, and just 20% by itself, honestly, is almost not enough. You got to get into that 30-35%, which is a bigger upfront capital, but at the same time, your interest rates are going to be a lot lower as well as your principal.
Right, and that's the thing right now as investors, that's that big dilemma. Do we put more capital, hard-earned cash to work in that property, or do we, wait for interest rates to drop and then sort of, figure out what our bottom lines become at that point, right? So just for our viewers, I said, looking at the rents, I think look, Toronto, obviously, GTA, much higher, but the price points are higher, right? So your margins are different. And I just really got attracted to the fact that Calgary has a growing market. So why, I get asked this question all the time, and it's a very difficult question to answer, but what development, what sort of things are happening on the ground floor, infrastructure? I know you mentioned something about something's changing in some of our areas. And, a lot of people might have seen online, I think Amazon just dumped a couple billion or almost a few $1 billion in I don't know exactly what they dumped in, and maybe you can clarify that for us. Let us know what sort of infrastructure development, job creation is happening in Calgary that would drive people down there.
A couple of things that Calgary, I feel, has done very well is our film and theater production. If you watch The Last of Us, that was obviously the most popular. But having, big time celebrities come into Calgary and talk about Calgary and kind of bring Calgary to that world stage at some of these high-end video premieres. We've done really well in the tech sector. So one of the things that I've recently learned in the last 6 months is that Calgary actually has attracted a lot of Indian cultured tech companies. So they've actually done a really good job in advertising in India and actually bringing in a lot of the engineers in the IT sector, which has really attracted a lot of people. So it's actually pretty mind-blowing how many Indians are reaching out to me and liking my channel because they're very analytical. And I ask, what do you do? And a majority of them do IT. And Calgary is a very hot spot right now. I think Ottawa is also a really hot spot in Canada, if I remember correctly. But Calgary, I think on some of the lists that I saw, are third in the country, which is still relatively high.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, you're bringing up some really valid points. I can agree with you on that regard when you look at where a lot of the migration is coming. I think a lot more people are going to see the value, especially when home prices continue to, expand. I mean, here they've contracted a little bit, but obviously they still remain elevated. So, I mean, Adam, look, this is, I really want to thank you again. As I said, I want to be very cautious of your time. I know we're extremely busy and you're busy. So I want to thank you again for, allowing us this opportunity to have you on the podcast. But before we get off, once again, just want to remind everybody, first and foremost, great YouTube channel. You have to check it out. And we'll definitely be putting a link to that YouTube channel. So if you want to get more information on the Calgary market. But Adam, tell us before we sign off, where they can find you.
Well, all over YouTube. At the end of the day, you can just give a quick little Google search of Adam Fife. That's kind of my bread and butter at the most part. I do the Instagram and I do the TikTok, but at the end of the day, YouTube is going to be the most value if people are willing to give me a couple of minutes of their day.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Adam, for joining us on the podcast. Oh, and there we go. There's thanks again for joining us on the podcast. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at InTouch Mortgage Solutions, Instagram, and all social media platforms. Until next week, thanks for watching.
Welcome to the Financing Simplified podcast with Anthony Venuto. If you're looking for answers to your financial questions, let Anthony and his network of friends and associates answer regular questions that regular people have about their money. Thanks for tuning in. It's time to start simplifying your finances.